Hi, welcome to your lecture on evolution by natural selection. We define evolution as just changes in living organisms over time. It is how we explain how modern organisms have descended from ancient organisms. Two of the words we use a lot when we're talking about evolution are fitness and adaptation, and it's important to distinguish between the two of them. Fitness is the ability of an individual to survive and reproduce in its specific environment. If you are evolutionarily fit, then you are able to survive to the age where you are able to reproduce and then reproduce and also have your offspring survive to the same age to be able to do the same thing. It is not a measure of how strong you are, how fit you are, how healthy you are. It is just whether or not you reproduce. An adaptation is any inherited characteristic that increases an organism's chance of survival, including their ability to reproduce or their evolutionary fitness. So organisms have to compete for limited resources like food, water, shelter, and some organisms are more fit than others, meaning that they are better able to do that, which increases their chance of surviving and being able to reproduce and pass those genes on. One real key here is that all these traits or characteristics, they have to be inherited, because without it being written in your DNA and being passed on, then that's not something you're going to give to the next generation. So what determines survival? Traits that can help an individual survive are an ability to survive a predator, the ability to survive a disease, the ability to successfully compete for food or compete for territory. Traits that can help an individual reproduce are the ability to attract a mate, which here you have this peacock, and that is, the tail is specifically for attracting a mate, and the ability to compete for nesting sites, and the ability to successfully raise their young. We spoke about natural selection a little bit in the last slide, so this is just a little review. Important keys to natural selection are that variation in traits. There have to be some differences among the individuals in the population. There also needs to be differential reproduction. So here you see green and brown beetles. And the bird in the second picture is eating all of the green beetles. So not all individuals get to reproduce. Some of them get eaten before they have the ability to reproduce, or they die before they're able to reproduce. So there has to be some factors that are more favorable for certain individuals and less favorable for others. There must be heredity. That's what we were talking about when we said inherited characteristics, and they must be something that can be passed on from generation to generation. The surviving brown beetles have baby beetles because brown baby beetles, because it is an inherited genetic trait. And the end result is natural selection. The more advantageous trait, or the brown coloration, which all the beetles have in the offspring, just becomes more popular in the population. And if the process continues in that direction, then all individuals in the population could end up being brown. Now, of course, there could be factors that come into play that swing in the other direction. Over time, natural selection results in changes in the inherited characteristics of a population, and these changes increase the species' fitness in its environment. And here you have a lot of organisms with a bunch of very, very different sources of genetic variation include gene flow. Gene flow is the movement of genes from one population to another, or migration. So if you immigrate or emigrate, you're moving either into or away from a population. You take your genes with you, and if you reproduce in this new area, you're introducing genetic variation to the new area. Also think of like birds when they migrate. They are going great distances, and they are taking their genes with them and introducing them into a new area. Any mutations that we talked about in the DNA unit are changes in the sequence of DNA. Remember, there are point mutations, insertions, deletions, substitutions. There are chromosomal mutations. So any of those can be inherited. Some mutations can affect the organism's fitness, while others have no effect on their fitness or even a detrimental effect. And then the ones that have a detrimental effect are less likely to be passed on from generation to generation. Gene shuffling. So this is meiosis. Okay, so when we talked about meiosis, how the chromosomes line up on either side of the metaphase plate and crossing over where a chunk of one chromosome goes onto the other with their homologous pairs, and then sexual reproduction where it's randomized which sperm meets which egg. So we refer to that whole process of meiosis with the mixing up of the chromosomes you get in each sperm and each egg, plus the randomization that occurs when you have sexual reproduction as gene shuffling. Sexual reproduction produces many different combinations of genes, but in itself, it does not alter the relative frequencies of each type of allele in a population. When we talk about alleles, we are again referring to either the dominant or the recessive version of that trait. And everybody has 2 alleles for every trait. You get 1 allele from each parent. So natural selection determines which alleles are passed from one generation to the next. As a result, it can change the relative frequencies of the alleles in the population over time. Evolution is any change in the relative frequency of alleles in a population's gene pool, and it acts on populations, not individuals. Genetic drift is another source of evolutionary change, and it is just random changes in allele frequencies. In small populations, individuals that carry a particular allele may leave more descendants than other individuals just by chance. Over time, a series of chance occurrences of this type can cause the allele to become more common in a population. The founder effect is another source of evolutionary or genetic change, and it occurs when a small group of individuals colonize a new habitat. Think of an island. If you are shipwrecked on an island with only, 20 individuals on the boat, Gilligan's Island, if you remember that really old TV show, which probably none of you have watched. And so if you're going to colonize the new island, meaning that you are going to reproduce and start a new population with just those small portion of people that are there, then the population you end up with on the island could look a lot different than the frequencies or than the population from the mainland that's much, much larger, because you have just this small portion of individuals, and it could not be representative of the main population. So members of the colony may carry alleles in different relative frequencies than the larger population. If so, the population they found will be genetically different from the parent population. If we use an example of 20 individuals that are shipwrecked, and possibly 10 of the individuals have red hair. We know that 50% of the main population does not have red hair, but if they colonized that new island, you would have an island filled with redheads eventually, and that would not be representative of the main land population at all. Genetic equilibrium is the last thing we're going to talk about, and that is what happens when evolution does not occur because all of the allele frequencies remain constant. There are 5 conditions required to maintain a genetic equilibrium: random mating, a very large population, and no movement into or out of the population, meaning nobody leaves and nobody new comes in. There are absolutely no genetic mutations and no natural selection. Genetic equilibrium is not something we really see in the real world. It is something that we use mathematically to calculate allele frequencies. within a population, but there's always going to be some sort of immigration into or out of the population. There are genetic mutations with every individual that occur just because of the fact that your body's copying so much DNA. There are a few mistakes that occur, and natural selection, it does occur. There are predators. There is limited resources. So in order for that to occur, then you would have to have, really no predators, unlimited food, unlimited space, and it's not what we see occurring in real life. Have a good day.